Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this second Ask SENSS webinar. I'm Fragiskos Filipeos. I'm a professor of international business at the University of Essex, and I'm the Deputy Director for the South and East Network for Social Sciences with predominant responsibility for training. Just before we start, a couple of items on housekeeping. The first is that I will be recording this seminar. We will be putting the recording on the website together with the slides, the shared screen. We've got already one recording on the website, which is a webinar I gave a couple of weeks ago with exactly the same material. And this is going to be the recording from today. The second item is that this is the second out of a series of three webinars that we're hosting around Ask SENSS. The final webinar, if you've got particular questions, will be delivered on Saturday at 11 o'clock in the morning, UK time. And that will be a webinar focusing primarily on questions and answers that we have had throughout this process of communicating with potential candidates. The third item of housekeeping is around asking questions today. There are three ways you can ask a question. You will see me from time to time looking on the side of my screen. It's where I've got my second monitor. You could either use the Q&A function of Zoom, you could use the chat function, or of course, you could raise your hand and come on mic. The way I will be handling those questions is there might be questions which will be relevant for the area I will be covering, and therefore I might be stopping the natural kind of discussion and answering those questions, or there might be questions towards that are more generic, and what I will do is I will skim through all of them towards the end of the webinar and ensure that everything has been responded to. So if I don't pick up immediately your questions, it might be that because I will be answering it through my slides later on, or it might be that it's a more general question that I will be picking up towards the end. But I can reassure you that throughout the next hour and a half, I've scheduled for 2 hours, I will be answering every single question that will appear on my screen. Now, what are the purposes of doing this webinar? I've got four areas that I would like to cover. The first one is why do a PhD? And of course, what do we try to deliver through SENSS PhDs? That question might also help you think about your motivation about pursuing postdoctoral research studies. It's a question that you will have to address in your personal statements, talking about your motivation. And what I'm aiming to do is give you some material to think about, what are your motivations, and putting them in a more explicit format in your personal statement, which will be used for evaluating your application. I'll spend some time talking about what is SENSS, which stands for, as I mentioned already, South and East Network for Social Sciences. And then the two final areas are around finding a supervisor and communicating with one. If you haven't done that already, it's one of the very important tasks that you should be doing over the next few days. And then finally, what do we use? What are the criteria that we use to evaluate proposals? And what I will do in this section is I will tell you kind of the reviewer's perspective of a proposal, and I will highlight which are the main areas you need to pay particular attention to in order to maximize your chances of getting a SENSS scholarship. Right. Let's start by asking the question, why do a PhD? And for many years, and for many people, the PhD was simply an entry route into an academic world. It's a qualification that most people tend to pursue in order to become academics, in order to work for university, in order to become teachers. And That has been the main kind of assumption that we have had so far. And then out of those doctoral students, only the best become professors. I have to actually admit that the last few years, the academic profession has been quite competitive. Um, for almost every 4 or 5 PhD students that graduate from UK universities, there is a single job, there is one job that they can apply all, and that makes that job market quite competitive. And then the other assumption was that the career paths of those that pursue PhDs is a relatively linear career path where you go from a PhD to your first lectureship appointment, to an assistant professorship, to then to an associate, and then a full professor. Now, this is one route that the PhD will open. But in reality, the modern PhD and the PhD that we have designed within SENSS together with our partners, the PhD that the ESRC has asked us to think about is a qualification that not only will give you a path into academia, but will open multiple paths in other organizations that might actually have research functions. So when we think about training and developing you as doctoral students, we're not only thinking about giving you the tools to be able to publish, to be able to conduct peer reviews for journals, to understand the academic world, but we do place particular emphasis and particular focus on developing skills that will allow you to translate your research for the real world out there. We will help you develop skills that will enhance your engagements and impact with organizations outside higher education institutional contexts. And therefore, the aim of the PhD is not simply to open the door to the academia, but to allow you to have multiple routes and multiple career options in front of you. Why do students pursue a PhD? Why would someone come and say, okay, I want to do a PhD, I want to study further, I've done my undergraduate, I've done my master's, and now I want to do something more advanced? And the reason I'm putting that here is to just get you, as I talk about these 3 groups of purposes, to give you the opportunity to think about yourselves and think about what do you want to achieve and why are you doing this qualification. And before I move on, I just want to highlight here that doing a PhD is not a sprint. If I would use a sports analogy, doing the PhD is a marathon in reality. At the minimum, a PhD would take about 3 years from beginning to completion. The funding, and I'll come that into a few minutes, the funding we offer covers a minimum of 3.5 years for someone to do their PhD. And in that process of 3 years, there will be cases where obviously everything will be going fine. Your results will work, your literature will be written in a good way. You might basically get publication published, but equally there will be cases and chances where you might hit what a marathon runner calls the wall, a point where you won't be able to pursue or progress any further unless you basically draw from your reserves and your motivation in order to overcome that obstacle. So thank you for those that you're confirming that you can hear me well. I've checked the sound earlier and it was working fine. So there are 3 purposes that students tend to think about. These are not mutually exclusive. So it doesn't mean that because you've got instrumental purpose, you can't have intellectual or altruistic. But the way you could think about it is, if I'm writing my personal statement, what do I need to highlight? What are the things I can put in my personal statement when someone asks me, why do I want to do a PhD? Now, obviously, the first one, which I've alluded to, and I've mentioned quite a few things already, is this career. It's the career of the researcher. It's someone who wants to work in a research function, and that research function can be within the academic world as a professor, or it could be within an organization. And there are a lot of organizations that have research functions, significant research functions, where you can get jobs into. So it's almost like a career qualification. The second one, which has to be strong because that's the area where you can kind of draw resources from if things get hard, is this intellectual purposes. Um, you might have a personal interest. It might be that you get satisfaction. It might be that you want to contribute to a discipline. And I always use the example here whenever I talk to colleagues. You imagine yourselves on a, let's say, Friday evening. You have just finished putting together a very nice sample that will allow you to explore a couple of research questions. You put it into your statistical software, and you've written your command, and you're really, really, really ready to press the enter button and get your first results. And the question there is, it's Friday evening, you get a phone call from someone, oh, let's go out and have a drink. What do you do? Would you say, okay, yeah, I'm switching off my computer and I'm going and having a drink? Or do you actually have that curiosity where, you hit the enter button, and for the first few seconds, you see those new results? And does that give you some satisfaction? And it's really, really interesting. In my case, I would say, okay, I'll hit the enter button, I'll read those first results, and then I'll go for a drink. So it's around those personal interests and that satisfaction where you explore something new and you want to make a contribution, which is really, really important and drives you as a researcher. And then, of course, a lot of us have what we would call altruistic purposes. We want to enable change, we want to solve problems, we want to benefit others. SENSS, in the way it is structured, it is structured in what I call thematic approaches, and you will see further down when I talk about those thematic approaches that all of them are related to big challenges that we face as society today. And you've got this drive that you want to resolve some of those problems. You want to enable change, and it could be enable change in your home country, it could be enable change for the world overall. So these are kind of the three purposes that someone might think about why pursuing a PhD, and you could elaborate on those. You could see with which one or which ones you kind of align with, and you could reflect on them in your personal statement. Now, I've said all these things just to highlight that if you look at the data on doctoral destinations, and this is where doctoral researchers go after they finish with their PhD, and social sciences is the light purple column there, you will see that even in social sciences, which is an area of disciplines that still is attracted to the academia, even in our case, it's less than 50% of the doctoral candidates that will end up in a role which is related to teaching and lecturing in higher education. The remaining just over 50% will go and work in other research occupations, will work in research functions, not higher education, will do other common doctoral occupations or completely other occupations of altogether. And obviously, if you look at other kind of areas like biological sciences or biomedical sciences or physical sciences, that trend is even stronger. People don't take a PhD, don't do a PhD because they want to work in academia, but because they want to expand their horizons and do that. And this is what we're trying to do at SENSS. So let me spend the next few minutes talking about the South and East Network for Social Sciences, and helping you make sense of SENSS and what we are and what we're not. And I think it's really, really clear to also highlight what we're not as an organization. So we are a consortium of universities which receives funding from one of the 7 UKRI, UK Research and Innovation Council. We get funding from a council which is called Economic and Social Research Council. At the moment, there are 15 doctoral training partnerships that cover the whole of the UK and Northern Ireland. And we have a grant from ESRC. That grant is approximately £2.5 million a year, and we utilize that grant in order to manage and award studentships, which is funding for PhDs, as well as a small number of what we call postdoctoral fellowships for students that have completed their PhD and they want to go and do something at the postdoctoral level. The bread and butter of SENSS obviously are the studentships, which is where most of that funding goes to. Now, overall, in the UK, those 15 doctoral training partnerships, they have received funding for about 500 studentships. In our case, we have approximately 30 to 35 studentships per year. And the first competition that SENSS will run is this year, with students going through the process of the competition over the next few months, being awarded a studentship in April and starting their PhDs in October 2024. As I said, we are a consortium of universities. The names are there. We cover a lot of the east of England, like East Anglia, Essex, which is the coordinating institution. We've got partners located in London, Goldsmiths, City, Middlesex and Roehampton are all London-based universities. And then we've got Lincoln and Cranfield, which are slightly further north of London. And each of those partners contributes to the kind of collaboration of the South and East Network of Social Sciences. Now, one of the important things I need to highlight here is that SENSS is not an higher education institution in itself. We're not a university. We are a collaboration of universities, and therefore we don't award PhDs. Your PhD will be awarded by one of those 8 institutions. What we will be doing is we will be offering you the funding. So we control the funding. Those 8 institutions control your studies or support you throughout your studies. And the reason I'm saying that is because in order to apply for SENSS funding, in order to go through our SENSS competition and get funding, you have to have secured a place for a PhD in one of those 8 institutions. So you apply for funding through SENSS, but what you also need to do is you need to make up your mind and apply for a PhD through one of those 8 institutions. So it's really, really crucial to get that message across, that an application to SENSS only won't be accepted. You need to have an application for a PhD through one of those 8 institutions, and then you need to apply for funding through SENSS. Okay, just wanted to clarify the difference in nature of SENSS from the 8 institutions. If you are successful and receive funding in April, if you are successful and are one of those 35 students that will start with us next October, you will have a range of tools throughout your PhD to help you develop skills. And those tools range from, innovative and world-class doctoral training. We will be asking you specifically about what kind of training you might need for your PhD, and we will be supporting you in accessing that. We have significant online training, including access to Sage Campus. Sage is the publisher. We've got access to Sage Campus, which will give you access to a suite of online training, helping you develop your skills, access to all 8 institutions and their training provision, access to external organizations offering work placements. You will get additional funding should you wish for to do overseas visits, spend time in an institution outside the UK and develop your networks. You will get additional funding if you want to do field work in your PhD. You will have money to attend conferences, to pursue academic publishing, and obviously through our virtual learning environment, we have a VLE, as we call it. You get access to a lot of other online training and other opportunities as well. And it's down to you and your supervisor to basically look at all that landscape and say, okay, which are the tools, which are the skills that I need to develop, and which are the tools. I can guarantee you that, there are so many offerings for so many skills development that, if you want to spend a lot of your time doing additional things throughout your PhD, you will never run short of opportunities throughout SENSS. We are a small team which manages the grant. We call it the core team. At the moment, the director is Professor Robert Jones. He's going to be the director until the 15th of December. I will be taking over the directorship of SENSS from the 16th of December, moving on from being the deputy director the last 4 years. We currently recruit for a new deputy director who's going to be the training lead for the new DTP, and we hope to have someone in place before January. And then we've got a manager who's the person that knows everything about the SRC and your studentship, and is the first person if you have any issues with your studentship, Felicity Cesnat. There will be a training and development manager from an admin perspective to support you again in your studies, and we've got a coordinator and a finance manager. Now, in terms of the competition for SENSS, the two most important people, and I've got a slide with our emails there, are Rach Layton Jones. She's the admin person that manages the platform, the application platform. Any issues, any problems you might have with your application, the system doesn't work, the system doesn't allow you to do anything, she's the first port of call. And her email is coordinator@sense-dtp.ac.uk. I've got the slide at the end with the emails. If there are any academic questions around your application, if you're thinking about, getting some feedback on your application, or thinking about your thematic kind of alignment, you could always email me at the Dep Director email. Again, I'll put that on the screen towards the end of the webinar. Now, in social sciences, there are several disciplines, and yes, there is. I've mentioned a bit about the training. I've got a question. I'm going to pick it up here. Is there a link available to the SENSS training development courses available during the PhD? The link is actually only through the VLE, so you will be able to access those only through the virtual learning environment once you get into SENSS. So there is nothing now I can tell you, this is what we're offering, because it is within a secure environment. You can appreciate we cannot open it to everyone out there. We hold it for those students that get funding, but also if you were to get an offer from one of those universities and you're not getting a SENSS studentship, you still will be able to access the VLE and a lot of that online training, irrespective of your funding status. So if you're doing your PhD at Essex, or if you're doing your PhD at East Anglia, you will be able to access the VLE irrespective of your funding status. Right. And then I'll talk a bit, Tia, I'll talk a bit about the themes, and then I'll answer the question about the thematic areas and whether that topic fits into one of the themes. So we've moved away from a disciplinary-based perspective in social sciences, and we moved into this thematic approach. And the way we've done it is we looked at what are the ESRC priorities. We looked at what are the grand challenges that society is facing today, and we have developed those 6 themes. Now, I have to very, very clearly say here that these are not ordered in terms of importance. So for us at SENSS, all 6 themes are of equal priority. Just because I've put sustainability as number 1 and advanced methods as number 6 doesn't mean anything. It's just for presentation purposes. So we have one theme which is around sustainability and climate emergency. We've got one theme which is around health, well-being, and social care. The third one is around justice, institutions, and social change, resolving uncertainty and addressing crises, digital social sciences, and then advanced methods in social and economic research, which is a theme focused specifically on the development of new tools in social sciences. Now, I said there was this process of mapping ESRC priorities and challenges, and a very useful table which we have on the website. It's an indicative table, but it will give you some sense of where your project might fit, is this one. So this one gives you a sense of the contents for each of those thematic areas. It also tells you what are the sustainable development goals that this thematic area is touching upon. And then, of course, what are the ESRC priorities that, again, are aligned to that particular thematic area. This is by no means the divine wisdom. There could be deviations. Someone can argue that my project, yes, touches on this additional sustainable development goal, and it could go into that theme. And just because that's not on the table doesn't mean anything. It's just an indication to give you, what has been the thinking behind putting those themes together. So if you were to think about organized crime, mafia studies, one of the areas where I would potentially position it is around justice, institutions, social change. That's where it would potentially be. Equally, someone can argue that an area like that might be around resolving uncertainty and addressing crisis. But it's down to you and your supervisor to come up with the arguments to convince the panel which theme you're applying to. So for me, the natural inclination to answer that specific question would be that, it is part of institutions, it is part of justice and social change, and then, of course, to a lesser degree, resolving uncertainty. So in the process of applying for SENSS, we will ask you to tell us in which theme your project fits. So where do you see yourself as a researcher, coming from a business and management, coming from a socio-legal perspective, coming from a psychological perspective, coming from whatever perspective? Which area do you think your project fits within? Which is the thematic area in order for you to be put into that stream of studies and get you to work with other researchers on that thematic area? As I said, this table is on the website, and so you can read through it and you can align your project with it. The other important thing which I'd like to highlight here is that in order to be able to apply for a specific thematic area, you need to be able to, the university, your selected institutions should participate in that area. And obviously, most institutions tend to participate in most areas. But there are exceptions, and the exceptions there are Cranfield, Lincoln, and Middlesex. And Cranfield has opted out of the health, well-being, and social care, or the advanced methods. Lincoln has opted out of the advanced methods, and Middlesex has opted out of the digital social sciences. So if you were to do a PhD in those 3 institutions, these are three thematic areas that you wouldn't be able to apply into. The question, this is a very common question: could the research proposal fit within 2 thematic areas? A proposal could fit within 2 thematic areas. The advice we give is you shouldn't be trying to fit yourselves in too many things. I think the thematic areas are broad enough to allow you to prioritize and say, look, yes, I might make a contribution to that second thematic area or that third thematic area. Or I'm crossing the boundaries of the 2 thematic areas. And it could be quite clear that occasionally some project might, for example, have significant elements of advanced methods. But if it's an advanced methods which is used only as a tool, not as a purpose to create a new tool, and there is another thematic area where the project fits within. So for example, someone wants to develop a new tool to measure green finance. The suggestion there is that this project fits much better with the sustainability and climate emergency. And obviously, yes, it touches on advanced methods, but it's not the primary thematic area. So in the application process, we would ask you to identify which of those 6 is the dominant one where your proposal fits within. 3 steps to making an application. What I've mentioned already, which is quite crucial, I'll say it quite a few times again, just to get it installed in your minds. You need to apply for a PhD place at your home institution. Without applying for a PhD place, you won't be able to get into the process. Once you've done that, you've got your profile, you've got your offer, you need to create an HI Apply account. HI Apply is the platform we use for our applications at SENSS, and then gradually you develop your proposal with your supervisor and submit it online. Now, a very common question that comes up here is, can I submit the same proposal for the university I'm applying to in SENSS? And the answer is yes, of course you can. Occasionally, though, what usually happens is universities have a slightly earlier deadline for application. You go through a process of selection there, you get some feedback on your proposal through that process of selection, and therefore you could then enhance your proposal on the basis of that feedback. So what you could do is you could say, okay, during my interview or during the discussions I had with the people that have taken me through the selection process in the institution, they said, oh, you need to do X, Y, Z with your methodology. Before you submit to SENSS, you could actually make those changes and strengthen your proposal. So there is one question which is actually quite important here. Is it necessary to have a spot at the top? A spot, I mean, I imagine it's a place, it's an offer from the home institution when applying for SENSS, or is submitting an application sufficient? Usually, what happens is most institutions, and I urge you to go and check the deadlines that each institution might have, because they could be different from the one institution from the other. Usually those institutions will get you through the process and will offer you a place before you apply for SENSS. So in your application to the home institution, you need to identify, you need to tell them that you are interested in applying for SENSS funding, and therefore what usually happens is they will ensure that you get an offer in that institution. From our perspective, from a SENSS perspective, what is really important is that your name and your application is in the system of that home institution. And the reason is that when you apply for SENSS, the first step, it is an institutional shift, and I'll explain that in a minute. So when you apply to SENSS, the first thing we do is we say to the 8 institutions, tell us which are those applications that you would like to put forward, you would like to nominate for SENSS funding. So unless your name is in the system, you won't be able to be progressed. For those finishing masters in September, we need master's transcripts to apply? And I'll come to that in a minute. You don't even need to have a master's, or you don't even, if you are an undergraduate student currently completing the 3rd year, no, you don't need that. What's going to happen is you will receive an offer letter from the institution, you will receive an offer letter from us, and in that offer letter we'll say, look, in order for you to start your studentship in October 2024, you need to provide us with the transcripts of your completed studies. SENSS is not open for aiming for January entry. So there have been cases, just to give you an example, there have been cases where someone had to defer their studies from an October start to a January start. These have been very few. The issue is that the ESRC, the rules that the ESRC puts on the studentship is that you can't defer it for more than a couple of months. So effectively, if you wanted to start in January, you will have to lose part of your funding in a sense. Applying for a PhD at the chosen institution in addition to the SENSS application. So again, what I said is your name needs to be, it doesn't matter if you're holding an offer or not from that home institution, you need to have your name into the application process and explain, in that application that you're applying for SENSS funding. And then the home institution, in their decision, which students will nominate, which students will support for SENSS, they will progress your application faster for the PhD. Right. The main competition is the student-led competition. This is, as I said, the bread and butter. Is a competition that will attract about 24 to 25 studentships. Just to put it into perspective, in terms of order of magnitude, on an annual basis, we tend to receive about 800 applications at the SENSS level. Out of those 800, just over 200 are supported and nominated by institutions. So we ask institutions to do the institutional shifting, which is the first of the two stages. Those institutions have a number of nominations they can put forward. And what they say to us is, look, University of East Anglia has about 20 nominations altogether, and they give us the numbers. So these the names. These are the names that University of East Anglia would like to support throughout the SENSS funding process. Out of those 200s, all applications are then, those 200 applications are then reviewed by what we call the thematic panels. Depending on your theme, your application will be aligned with one of those thematic panels. It will be reviewed by a group of experts in that thematic area. Your application will be evaluated, and then we will merge again all applications from the different thematic panels, and we will create a list which will have all the names in a ranked order. Usually at this stage, we progress about 80 candidates out of the 200. So out of the 800, 200 progress in the institutional shifting, 80 progress from the thematic panel shifting to the final stage, which is the management board stage. And the management board reviews that list of ranked projects, ranked candidates, and we go down that list and make offers to students. And we usually get to about 25 to 30, depending on the amount of funding, depending on the type of studentships we might award, depending on how expensive some of those studentships are, if they use fieldwork, for example, if they need substantial training, so on and so forth. So the offers are being made in in April, and the start date is in October. So in reality, out of the 800 applications that we receive at SENSS, only 30 will get funding in the end. So it is a very competitive process, and I have to highlight that. It's one of those processes that, unfortunately, funding is not unlimited. It would be ideal to be able to fund as many students as possible, but we have the constraints that we have to work with. So unit of assessment. So unit of assessment, it hasn't been, but it's perhaps something that it's not necessarily important for you to know. The process through which we decide how many nominations each institution can put forward has to do with two things. One is how many thematic areas this institution participates, and also how many schools or departments each institution has put forward for SENSS. So just to give you an example, if you were to do your PhD at Norwich Business School, which is the Universities of East Anglia Business School, you could apply to any of the 6 themes you would like. So Norwich Business School at the moment has effectively 12 nominations it could make towards SENSS out of the applications it has received. Okay, but that's more about the schools. It's more about the mechanics of the process and how many nominations a university can actually make. And you can appreciate that larger institutions like Essex, East Anglia, Goldsmiths, City have more nominations in the process. Lincoln, Cranfield, Middlesex have fewer nominations. The only good thing with those three is that they have been uh, at least one ring-fenced award. So the top candidate from Cranfield, the top candidate from Lincoln, or the top candidate from Middlesex will be guaranteed a studentship irrespective of where they are in the overall list of candidates. There is one date on this slide which is really, really important for you, and you need to engrave it with big, bold red letters in your minds. That's the Friday, the 9th of February. Friday, the 9th of February is the deadline for SENSS applications. As I said, home institutions might have an earlier deadline, so keep an eye out for that. You need to meet that deadline before you meet the SENSS deadline. Okay, losing that deadline makes you ineligible, irrespective of whether you apply for SENSS. Okay, meeting that deadline and losing the SENSS deadline again makes you ineligible for funding. So you need to meet both deadlines, both the home institution deadline, which usually home institutions will have them on their web page, as well as the SENSS deadline. Now, how do we determine how much money and how much funding we will give you? So in the application, you will see, as you put together your application through HI Apply, you will see there is a section which asks you what kind of training you have received so far in your undergraduate master studies. And the minimum funding you will get is for 3.5 years. That includes 3 months of integrated placement. Every single student that will do a SENSS-funded studentship will do an integrated placement, which will last up to 3 months. I'll come back to a placement later on and explain what is this process. You could apply for additional funding to do what we call overseas institutional visits, spend time in an institution abroad. You could apply for additional funding to do field work or difficult language training. Imagine someone that wants to do a PhD in sub-Saharan Africa, talking to local populations. They don't speak the language. What we will do in this process, we will offer them additional money and additional time to learn the language, learn the local dialects. We will offer them additional money to spend time doing that field work, plus the expenses. And that can actually kind of increase the cost of a studentship quite a lot. The maximum in this initial process that someone will receive is 4.5 years, and this is what covers someone that comes straight from their undergraduate study. So we usually tend to have two types of candidates here. We get students that come straight from their undergraduate degree. You might be currently in your 3rd year of your undergraduate studies. You're thinking of doing additional training. We will be funding 1 year to do a master's if necessary, and then we will be funding the 3.5 years to do the PhD. And then the second type of candidate, someone who comes with a master's, who have less training needs, and they can potentially be awarded the minimum of 3.5, or in cases where there might be specific training needs, we might be able to say, okay, this student gets a 3.75, which is an additional 3 months to cover that specific need. Obviously, that's something that's a discussion you will have to do with your supervisor. We don't ask you to tell us how much time you need. We ask, though, your supervisors to tell us how much time you need. So it's not a decision that you will have to make in the application, but in collaboration with your supervisor, you need to think very clearly and very carefully what are the needs you need to cover to fulfill this project satisfactorily. And the supervisor, in their supporting statement, they will have to write to us and say, look, actually, this student will need 3.5 years, or this student will need 4 years, or this student will need 4.5 years. And in the offer letter we will send you in April, we'll say we've been awarding you, 4.5 years, and these are the conditions of that funding. You need to do that master's, you need to do that training, that training. Uh, I will pick up most of the questions. I will pick up most of the questions later on. There is one which is around a master's in research methods plus the PhD program. You don't. So in this process, you apply for the PhD. You don't apply separately for master's funding. The master's is the integrated part of the funding, and therefore there is one supervisory team which will see you through the master's as well as the PhD. So you don't separate the supervisors. And as I said, you don't apply you don't need to apply for the master's. You need to apply for the PhD even if you come from the undergraduate. And then the university you're applying to will basically ensure that you register for a master's before you start your PhD. So your first year will be spent on the master's. And I'll come back to those remaining questions there, which are more about the technical things of the placements and the overseas visits later on. In this process, you also get funding to do your own selection of training. You've got access to this research training support grant, which is up to £3,500 for the duration of the award, which can fund conferences, can fund other training activities. And it's at the discretion of you and your supervisor to utilize and apply. So this is effectively money that we give you, and then you can spend it in whatever training activity you need. So clearly, no need to have a master's. You could also utilize professional experience, an undergraduate degree and professional experience to tell us in that training section of the application. Discuss it with the supervisor. Your supervisor will be able to identify what is the optimum time frame. Studentships are offered on a full-time basis and a part-time basis. Studentships are all fully funded, irrespective of your residential eligibility status, and I'll explain a bit more in a minute when I talk about eligibility and overseas candidates. So irrespective of whether you are an international candidate or a home candidate, your fees will be fully paid, will be fully waived. It's not that because you're an international candidate and you need to pay higher fees, what happens is we ask you then to use your stipend. Your fees are covered irrespective of your eligibility status. Now, how do I know whether I'm an international or a home candidate? Well, home candidates belong to the following categories. They can either be a British citizen, so hold a British passport. They could have a pre-settled status if they are a European Union student, or a settled status if they are a European Union student, or if they have indefinite leave to remain in the UK and not a European Union status. So those four categories are what we call home candidates. So British citizens, pre-settled, settled, and indefinite leave to remain. These are the four categories where students are automatically be considered home. Everyone else is an international candidate. Are there any restrictions for international candidates? There are no restrictions in the application process. There are no restrictions in the home institution shifting. There are no restrictions in the thematic panel shifting. There is one very important restriction that we have to comply with, which we make that decision at the very, very end of the whole process. And that restriction is that ESRC only allows us to award 30% of our studentships to international candidates. So in reality, out of those 35 awards, I cannot offer more than 12 to 13 awards to international candidates. So when I have this big list of candidates, the ranking, I can only award the 13 first top international candidates, not more than that. That's the only time where the quota of the ESRC is actually implemented. So you can apply, your application will be treated in exactly the same way in the home institutional stage, in the thematic panel stage. So if you've got a very strong quality application, doesn't really matter, you will end up in that ranked list, and you could probably end up quite high, which means that you shouldn't be worrying about the quota that we have. But in reality, at the end, I cannot offer more than 12 studentships, and it's not my rule, it's the SRC's rule. I cannot offer more than 30% of those studentships to international candidates. So check your eligibility, apply to the chosen university, discuss with the supervisor, and then apply for a SENSS studentship. Check again the deadline for your home institution, and remember that our deadline at SENSS is 12 o'clock, so noon, Greenwich Mean Time, which is the UK time, on Friday, 9th of February. You are only permitted to submit one application for a student-led studentship. So what does that mean? It means that you need to select through which institution your application will come to us. You can apply for a PhD place in as many institutions as you like, but when it comes to SENSS, so for example, someone applies to Essex and East Anglia. When it comes to SENSS, you need to select through which institution you will come to us. You need to select whether you're applying through East Anglia to SENSS or through Essex to SENSS. Okay, you can't have one application from East Anglia and one application from Essex coming through to the SENSS rounds. That's really, really important. There is no limit to the number of collaborative applications you can make. So what is the collaborate? We are currently in the process of selecting 6 projects which have been submitted by supervisors. Those projects will be advertised shortly after Christmas on jobs.ac.uk. These are going to be very specific projects. You could select, you could see whether they fit. You don't need to apply with a proposal to those projects. You just only need to demonstrate the fit with the project, and you can apply to any of those projects as you like. These are going to be projects advertised from SENSS specifically on jobs.ac.uk and findthephd.com. These are supervisor, as we call them, supervisor-led projects. So we give the opportunity to our supervisors to propose topics. So keep an eye out for those projects. You can make as many applications as you like for those projects. You can only make one applications for the student-led competition through one selected institution. Right, I'll pause here and see whether there are any questions that I can pick up at this point. Do we need 2 academic or professional references to apply? Right. This depends on the institution you're applying to. For SENSS, we have waived the requirement for references. We are one of those institutions that truly believes in equality, diversity, and inclusivity, and occasionally references create biases in the system and in the process of selection. So for SENSS, you won't need to submit any references. Your home institution, though, might ask you to submit references. Okay, so that's part of their selection process and their nomination process. For the SENSS process, that's not a requirement. Placements. So I've mentioned already that the funding period includes an integrated placement. So we would ask you to do 3 months of placements. There are a number of ways that can be resourced. One is you could design a placement with one organization that you already know, together with your supervisor. We will, as SENSS, provide placement opportunities. So we will be advertising placement opportunities through our network of partners. And then, of course, there will be placements which are advertised by the SRC. So there are 3 different routes. You can create a placement yourself. You could go for the one of the ready-made placements that SENSS will offer, or you could wait for one of those competitions that TSRC is running towards placements. It is usually with a non-higher education organization, so it's not a university placement. And what we would expect you to do there is to enhance and develop your employability, your engagement, your impact skills, and bring those skills back into your PhD. The placement can be related to the PhD, or it might be completely irrelevant from the PhD. We give you effectively 3 months to do that placement and to stop thinking about even your PhD if you want to do something completely different. Overseas institutional visit, yes, you can apply for a funded extension for OIV after you've submitted the application. The only two things which have to be included in your application, and in your application on the system, they're going to be very clear questions, is do you need additional money and time for a field work? Do you need additional money and time for difficult language training? These are the only two cases where you need to highlight them in your application. The overseas institutional visit is something that you can decide to apply for later on, and we have annual competitions that we allow you to do an application for that. So you don't need, as I said, separate supervisors. The secondary supervisor for the PhD is usually identified together with the primary supervisor. So once you've identified the primary supervisor, which I'll come to in a minute, you work with them to identify the remaining of the supervisory team. The budget of the overseas fieldwork, there is some guidance there. The budget for the overseas fieldwork usually covers travel, accommodation, sometimes might cover research assistance. It might cover safety and security aspects of that application. So we had someone who did an overseas fieldwork in a relatively dangerous zone. We paid for them to have almost like a driver bodyguard to escort them in that region, and that can be part of your budget. There are a number of things you can include. How early can you apply? You could apply for, so the next question is for someone currently undertaking a master's degree due to end in September 2024, how early can one apply? No, you shouldn't be waiting till you finish your master's. You can apply now because the funding will effectively start in October 2024. So you don't want a gap between your master's and your PhD start. If you started your PhD in January 2024, can you still apply? Yes, you can still apply. The funding won't start until October 2024. And we will be covering the remaining period of your PhD. So we won't backdate your funding. It doesn't mean that, October 2024, you will receive 3 years. You will only receive 2.5 years of funding because by that time you will have done almost 1 year of your PhD. Historically successful applications, my view there is that we don't have a depository of applications for two reasons. One, because every PhD project is relatively unique. B, because we've moved away from a disciplinary focus, which was the predecessor of SENSS, to a more thematic approach. So even if I had applications, successful applications, they would be under very different context. Tom, one of the suggestions I have there is you could talk to your potentially home institution and the supervisory team, and they might be able to give you a sense of some of those successful applications. The placement doesn't have to be arranged before the application. It could be arranged later on. We're asking you in your application about the placement, but it's not something that you definitely need to cover. And as I said, we will be posting the recording on the website. Do you consider mature students? So the answer is there are no barriers. There are no kind of issues around age, ethnicity, race, gender, sexual orientation, and we are one of those DTPs that is quite proud for our equality, diversity, and inclusivity approach to the applications, and removing as much bias as we can in that process. Anna, the only thing there, it might be that if your master's and undergraduate degree have been done a long time ago, it might be that the supervisor recommends that you do a refresher of those research skills, and they might recommend that, for example, you do another master's, which is part of the funding anyway. So it might be the case that we'll offer you 4.5 years, if successful, in order for you to do an additional master's. So you don't need to wait to complete a master's. That's the final question there, in September, to apply for the scholarship. You don't need to wait to complete your undergraduate. You can apply for those things. You can apply for the funding now, and then once you've completed your undergraduate or your master's in September, you will join the SENSS community in October. Now, finding a supervisor, and then I'll talk a bit about the criteria we're using. So this is the most important person in this whole process, because they will guide you throughout the process. They will also write a supporting statement for you as part of your application. So it's really, really important to get to talk to them as soon as possible. If you haven't identified a supervisor by now, I suggest that's really, really a key priority. Most institutions will close over the Christmas period, so you can't lose any more time. And then January is usually quite a busy month. So please do reach out to potential supervisors. Obviously, Google Scholar is a good resource to identify people that have written in the area that you would like to research, especially Google Scholar if you don't have access to institutional resources, if you're not doing a master's at the moment or an undergraduate at the moment. This is a good resource. And then, of course, you could always have a very focused approach. You know who you want to work with. You send them an email. You tell them that you want them to become your supervisor. What is really important to consider in this process is that the people that are potential supervisors tend to be A, quite busy individuals, B, they might receive quite a lot of emails from people saying, oh, I want to work with you as a supervisor. So it's really crucial to get the communication aspect right. And it might sound trivial what I'm saying here, but I can tell you from personal experience that if I receive 10 emails asking me to become supervisor for a particular project, I will respond to all 10 of them. That's my personal approach. Other colleagues might not, but I will then look carefully into the details of each of those emails, and I will be intrigued by the ones that have something unique, something innovative. So especially if it's the first time, if it's not your master's dissertation supervisor, if someone which is like a cold email, try to address them properly in that email. Don't be informal, at least in the first instance. You can have that informality, later on in the process, but start with them saying, dear Professor X, dear Professor Z. And then if they respond back in a very informal way, please, you can pick it up from there. Tell them something interesting about yourself. This is always something that makes people intrigued about why you want to do a PhD. You might come from a particular background, you might come from a particular country, you might have worked in an organization, and therefore you want to bring that experience, and explain how your research interest and your proposal matches their expertise and their approach. Proofread your email. Make sure that before you send it to any potential supervisor is clear of typos and everything like that. Shows attention to detail. Don't make extravagant claims. Don't say, oh, I've read every single paper of yours, because eventually they will hold you responsible to that, and they might ask questions about their publications. And also prepare for face-to-face interviews. Think of the questions they might ask you, prepare some answers. A key question that we always start with is the motivation. And I've mentioned already in the very beginning the motivation, and what are the motivations, the purposes of the students. So the message here is be respectful, um, be try to tell them something unique that will attract their attention, and they will make them think, oh, this is an interesting candidate, I want to work with them. And then, of course, ensure that you send your proposal to the right person in terms of matching your proposal with the research expertise and the research skills. Don't send them something which is very generic, or something which is in a completely different field than their field. That's quite important. I've got one question before I move on to writing the proposal. If someone holds an unconditional offer from a SENSS institution, no, it doesn't. It doesn't have an edge over other applications. Does it have an edge over other applications? No. It's just a matter that you're over that first stage, which is the application to the home institution. So you can now apply for SENSS without having to apply for that SENSS institution. Okay, so it doesn't distinguish you though, or your application in terms of the SENSS process. Right. In terms of the proposal, this is the main tool that we will be using to evaluate you. So in the application process of your home institution, you will probably get the opportunity to have an interview. In the SENSS process, unfortunately, we cannot afford, because of the size and the number of applications, we cannot offer to interview everyone. So the proposal and the application is where the evaluation will be based on. And it's really important to say that, because you won't get a second chance. That's your chance to shine through and basically convince your home institution, convince the thematic panel and everyone else at SENSS that you are really worth of that studentship. So it all starts with a discussion with your supervisor. They will be the person that gives you a lot of information. As I said, you might get an interview through your application at your home institution. Incorporate as much feedback into that. Read carefully the guidance notes we have on HI Apply. And the application has two stages: your application and the supervisor statement. Once you complete your application, you provide us with the details of your supervisor, and the system sends them an automatic email saying your student has completed an application on HI Apply. Could you now provide your supporting statement? And you need to finish with your part of the application before that email to the supervisor is generated. One important piece of information here is that in order for your application to be eligible, we have to receive by Friday, the 9th of February, both your side of the application as well as your supervisor statement. So don't feel, oh, it's Friday morning, 9 o'clock, I finished with my part of the application and job done. No, because the supervisor will then only have 3 hours to provide their supporting statement. So it's a collaborative process between you and your supervisor to ensure that you meet that deadline. And obviously your supervisor can have drafts of your application, and they can put together their supporting statement before that system and simply copy paste chunks of that into the system and hit submit. So they can have it ready, but I just need to make sure that you understand that in order for your application to be eligible, you need to basically have both your side as well as the supervisor's side submitted by the 9th of February. But the most important thing here is to develop a really strong research proposal. Now, the proposal consists of 4 sections. The actual proposal, it's really, really important, which is the maximum of 10,000 characters. The others are things like the title, the abstract, and the personal statement, which is, something that we ask you to write as a separate letter, and you provide that to us, which is about you and why you want to do the PhD. The 10,000 characters is about usually about 4 or 5 pages long, usually about 4,000 words kind of proposal. And what are the 3 essential ingredients for writing a good proposal? The first is the issue. So I usually call it the so what question. You know, what problem does your research address? You know, what theme do you fit into? Why is it important to explore that area? What what do we want to know about it? Um, and it's really, really an important issue here, because unless you get that issue right, you know, you won't get the reader's attention, you won't get the reviewer's attention. Then, assuming that you've got a very interesting question, the second question is, how do you are going to answer that question? You know, what is your research design? What are the methodological tools that you're proposing to utilize to answer that research question? And then, of course, who's going to benefit from that? You know, where will you contribute? Is it going to be an academic contribution? Is it going to be a contribution to practice? Is it going to be a contribution to policy? Is it going to be everything? All of the above. So where is your research contributing in terms of progressing knowledge forward, progressing practice forward? So these are the three kind of essential ingredients that we expect to see in a good, strong proposal. Good research question, innovative, a research design that maps onto that research questions, and a very clear identification of the beneficiaries of your outputs. So in terms of your research proposal, we would expect you to see key areas, research problems, the research context, the contribution to knowledge, the methods and the critical approaches. And then, of course, we also expect to see how the proposal will develop over the period of the award. We ask you for a timetable, and finally, how the doctoral research relates to your eventual career aims. Let me take the let me take it a slightly different approach, and I'll potentially through that I'll answer Tom's questions about what detail is the expectation for the methodological design. These are the things the things that you shouldn't be doing. You know, typos, lack of clarity, extreme jargon, and brief proposal with long references section. Now, a lot of the time, people ask me, why do you say no extreme jargon? You know, and the reason I'm saying that is because the thematic panel that will evaluate your proposal might not necessarily come directly from your discipline. So assuming you're an economist and you use a lot of the economic terms, and people in that thematic panel might come from sociology or might come from legal studies, you know, you need to be able to talk to them and explain to them the project and the proposal without necessarily utilizing extreme jargon. And that is an additional challenge that obviously we've introduced with that thematic approach. You know, before, you know, it was all disciplinary based. You've got your discipline, you could talk to economists, or you could talk to people in social legal studies, and job done. Here, you need to be able to explain the value of your proposal to a much wider kind of audience. And then, of course, the brief proposal with long references section usually indicates that this is an area of research which has matured, and therefore there is not much that we can progress. You know, your contribution is not going to be substantial, and there it's not an emerging literature, it's not an area where we would need to do additional work. So description of research proposal, research background and questions, including the literature, the methods, the proposed timeline, and the proposed impact. These are kind of structure, the structure of your proposal in that. Now, the methodological design needs to be clearly laid out and clearly mapped onto the research aims. But what we would also expect in that methodological design is for you to indicate to us whether there are any potential challenges you might face. I can give you one example. Someone claims, oh, I will be doing surveys in my PhD. We all know that surveys at the moment get a very small response rate. So what we would expect to see in that proposal is what would be the alternative way of approaching this research question if the survey doesn't meet its purpose, if the survey is not a successful tool, if the survey doesn't generate enough response rate. So we would expect you to lay out, you know, the methodology. particular disciplinary perspectives might have more detailed methodological approaches than others. So, for example, if you're a psychology student, we would and you're claiming I will be doing experiments, we would expect you in that to tell us about what kind of experiments, how you will be selecting the individuals that take part, what is your kind of control group versus non-control groups, things like that. If you're, for example, someone that does anthropological studies and you're doing field work and you're saying I'm going to do interviews, we would expect you to tell us how you're going to develop the interview protocol, how you're going to select your sample, how you're going to reach participants. So these kind of details is about reassuring us that not only you've got a good proposal, but you also know how to ensure that the proposal basically is successful, and you've got the data that you need to effectively bring it to fruition. Now, there are 4 areas that we use to assess your proposal. The first one is around the quality and the feasibility, which is 40%. The second one is around interdisciplinarity and impact potential. The third one is evidence of your preparation for your research, and then evidence of the quality of the local research environment, including the supervisory expertise. In reality, you control directly the first 3, and you control indirectly the 4th one. Why do I say you control the first 3? Because the first 3 are direct evaluations of yourselves, your statement, and your proposal. The 4th one is an indirect evaluation of how your proposal meets your supervisor's expertise. And obviously, I'm saying you control it indirectly because it's your selection of the supervisor that will be the initial point of that criterion. If you select the right supervisory team, if you work with that supervisor, then their statement, their supporting statement should reflect all these things, and therefore should give us confidence that you've built that rapport with them. So I'll tell you a bit more about each one of those criteria, reverse engineering what reviewers are looking at. So this is kind of the definition we've given to each of those criteria. Research question clearly outlined, the project located within existing literature and research. And yes, research background, when Daniela, when I'm talking about research background, I'm talking about the literature behind it, the supporting literature, the state of the art. And extensive or not extensive, it's a balancing act there, the literature. If you write a proposal which basically is a literature review, you can identify the gaps quite well, but then you don't give us confidence about your research methodology, which is quite important as well. Equally, what I would suggest, and I always suggest that, is that when you think about the literature, we would like to see the most recent advancements of that literature and where your proposal is located. We don't want a long literature review. We don't want you to go back to the seminal papers. We know how that literature has evolved. We want you to tell us where that literature is today and how your contribution will push that literature forward. So the detailed description of your proposed research, what is wanted here. So this is effectively what I said, the issue. What is the issue that you're addressing? What is the research question, which is clearly outlined, and why that issue is really important for us. So that's what the detailed description of your proposed research is trying to address there. In terms of the interdisciplinarity, we would ask you to elaborate how your proposal fits the relevant theme you have selected, and also think a bit about what is the impact beyond academia. What is this project going to generate? And then, of course, the other 2 are about you as an applicant, your ability to communicate, your understanding of the discipline. We would see the enthusiasm in the supervisor statement, the achievement, the progression you've done, life experiences, professional experiences you might have, which have prepared you for PhD studies. And then, of course, what is the supervisory team's expertise, what kind of experience they bring together, and how can they help you to connect with the wider network. The slides and everything like that are going to be there is already on the website from the previous webinar. This webinar, as I said, is going to be it's currently being recorded, and we'll put on the website as well. And it's all on the guidance, the documents we have prepared. So I'm not utilizing any material outside of that. The only thing which I have, which are not in the guidance, is the next few slides, which are the slides that I'm talking about the reviewer's perspective and what we expect to see. So in terms of the first, the feasibility, the quality, the interdisciplinarity, where we based our judgment is on your proposal. We also base our judgment on what the supervisor says about that particular area of research. And we will be looking to see, are you able to conduct and develop a strong research project? Have you thought about your research plan and potential issues, challenges, and do you know where you fit in the current field, through your literature review? So in simple terms, innovate, make your idea stand out. And what I always say here is that reviewers will probably have to read about 30 applications, and you need to make sure that yours stands out. So usually what happens is reviewers read those applications, they score them independently, and then we have meetings in each of those thematic areas where those reviewers come together and they discuss the applications. And it's very common to hear someone saying, oh, I remember this application, it's doing X, Y, Z, it's doing that particular topic. And for us, this is an application that has really stood out of everyone else, and it's a really interesting topic that we would like to explore further. Ensure that you have adequately covered the literature, as I said, and ensure that you have covered the most recent literature. As I said, we don't want to hear in that proposal what has happened 20, 30 years ago. We want to hear what is happening right now at that literature. So ensure that you get up-to-date references in that section. Do not over or under promise. It's a PhD, it's not a 10 years research plan. Remember, try to ensure that you carve it out and the supervisor can play a role there. It comes together with a feasibility question, and also ensure that you have this appropriate methodology and the contingency plan. It shows us that at least you are aware as a researcher of the potential shortcomings of your appropriate methodology and what might be the alternative. We want to ensure that the project is feasible, and we want to ensure that at the end of the 3.5 years, you will have the opportunity to submit, a good quality PhD. So outstanding quality, research methodology, clearly articulating the impact and feasible within the given time and resource limitations. So these are all factors that identify the quality of the research proposal. Now, you could have a very strong proposal, but that's not enough. You also need to convince the panel that based on your previous experience, based on your academic, professional, or life experience, you have prepared yourselves for postgraduate study and research. And obviously, it will be about you and you telling us about your existing training in your application, but it's also about your supervisor's evaluation. And it could be around your performance at undergraduate or postgraduate levels. It could be around your professional experience. And also, it's about how the program you have designed will contribute to your long-term career aims. And in simple terms, having a strong proposal, it's good. You've passed the first test, but it's also that you need to demonstrate that you are the most appropriate person to take it forward, that you have the right skills, you have the right motives, the right drive. Now, point that I want to highlight here is that we don't expect everyone to be 100% fully prepared to deliver on their PhD. But what we ask you and the supervisor in the application is, if you haven't been fully prepared, so if you're missing, for example, particular research skills or methodological skills, we evaluate your ability to identify training gaps and training opportunities. So what we do is we say, okay, you've identified this training gap. How are you going to cover it? What are you going to do? And the supervisor might tell you, put that into your application that you're going to be doing this workshop or you're going to be doing that training in order to cover that gap. So it's not only about, yes, I'm 100% prepared, but it's also about, I'm not 100% prepared. I know what I'm missing, and this is how I'm going to get it. And especially, this is the main difference between sometimes applications that are coming from postgraduate students, people that have done a master's, and undergraduate students. And this is why those applications are not being evaluated. We're not putting them in the same pot. We don't expect the quality of a research proposal from an undergraduate student to be the same of the quality of a research proposal that someone that has done a master's. And therefore, what we do is when we provide those applications to the panel, we very clearly indicate this is coming from an undergraduate student, this is coming from a postgraduate student, and they utilize the scores obviously different for those two group of candidates. Now, this is where I said you do control it to a certain degree, but not fully control this area, which is, quality of the local research environment. It has to do with the relationship you have developed with the supervisor, the relationship you have developed with the rest of the supervisory team, and the fit between you, them, and the project. So the supervisor should tell us about their individual roles in the supervisory team, and they should help you and support you in identifying training needs and suggested ways of meeting those training needs in the proposal. So you don't only need an excellent proposal, a clear demonstration that you are the best person to do that proposal, but also you need to be demonstrating that you have a team there that has the expertise and experience that they can identify training for you, and they can support you in that whole process. And that is really important. This is why it's really important to give your supervisor enough time to prepare their supporting statement for the application. In this whole process, we also ask you for a personal statement, and it's basically your opportunity to tell us why you deserve a studentship. It's not an academic piece of work here. It's not the proposal. It's about you. It's about your motivations, your academic interest, why SENSS, why that selected institution, why that chosen department. What do you find most appealing? It might be that, the placement opportunities is really something that you really look forward. Put it there. Talk to us about your preparedness. Tell us, I've done X, Y, Z in my personal life. Even someone could say, I'll use as an example, I'm a mother of 4 kids in the personal statement. I really know how to manage tasks and manage time. This is demonstrating preparedness. This is demonstrating the development of skills for a very challenging and a very demanding project. Okay, so it's not about, I've got a degree from a top institution only, and I've got very good marks, but it might be that there are other experiences through life. You might have worked through your undergraduate degree. And this is actually something that really tells us about your motivation, your resilience, your ability to become agile in challenging circumstances. Talk to us about those things and how they can contribute to you ensuring that over the next 3 years you perform all those crucial tasks and those challenging demands, and you are able to submit. My view is that there is this question about, is in the personal statement, do we need to directly say why SENSS or just why the institution? I think it's a mixture. Obviously, the institution will be an important part, why that selected institution, why the selected supervisory team, but it might be also that you want to tell us about why SENSS then. Obviously, selecting an institution will guide you in this process because that institution is part of SENSS, and therefore by default you will applying for us. But it might be that you tell us then what are the additional things you expect from SENSS throughout your program of studies. So it's more about the personal statement is more about your preparedness and your motivation, and why do you want us to offer you the opportunity to do a funded PhD. Now, I've got some more information here before we uh, get to a close. You've got the information on the studentships and the overview on the website. We've got two blogs from my former institution, University of Canada. I used to work, myself and a colleague of mine, we've written some pieces on how to apply for PhD funding and how to apply for a PhD in the UK. As I said, for any academic inquiries, I'm more than happy to respond to them. What I usually do is people that ask me to have one-to-ones, I send them back a doodle poll with specific times that they can select, and we then have a 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour one-to-one discussion around their proposal and challenges they might be facing. If you've got any admin issues around HI apply, please email Rach at admin@sense.ac.uk there. And these are all the information. Anna is asking me, do we know how many rough percentage of part-time PhDs we have awarded? I think it's usually a third. A third of the PhDs are part-time. A third of our awards are part-time. There is no restriction, though, I have to say, on how many awards we make, which are part-time, and how many awards are full-time. So there is nothing in the regulations, or there's nothing in the criteria saying, oh, X amount of awards needs to be part-time, Z amount of awards needs to be full-time, or a part-time award or a part-time application is not as strong as a full-time application. So there is nothing there in the criteria. And equally, with permission, you could switch during your studies. So someone can start with a part-time and then they can move to a full-time, or vice versa. What you get in terms of monetary value is, as I said, you get your fees completely waived, completely paid, and then you get an additional £17,800 per year, which is the stipend, which is money that comes directly to your bank account to support your cost of living. London universities, the London partners, receive an additional £2,000 on top of that, which is what we call the London allowance. Okay, and that is paid monthly into your bank account, and the money that comes from your stipend is also tax-free, so you're not paying tax. If you do work, and we do allow for a very small proportion of additional work on top of your PhD, if you do work, that work becomes taxable because it's not part of your stipend. Now, any additional questions you might have, I'll stop sharing my screen here, and I will bring the chat function and the questions and answers. So feel free to either post or come on mic. As I said, we will be putting the recording. If you've got reflecting on what we've discussed today, if you've got additional questions, we've got one more live webinar, which is going to be on Saturday, 11 o'clock. And at that point, I will be answering additional questions. And then, of course, if you've got a very special kind of type of question, which is very specific to your project or very specific to your case, I'm more than happy to discuss it on a one-to-one. So there are a couple of more questions. Theo is asking, each university can submit up to 2 top candidates per unit of assessments, and then the top candidates are then guaranteed in studentship regardless of any further shifting. No, this is not correct. So what happens is the process has the institution selects its top nominations. Those top nominations go to the thematic panel, and then the thematic panel ranks them in terms of the quality of the application. And then there is a cross-thematic panel kind of list which is being created, which basically is a ranked list. And we go down that ranked list from the top, usually up until the 25th, 26th candidate, and we award scholarships to those 24th, 25th. We send an offer letter very quickly after that process is completed. And the reason we do that is because we want to make sure that everybody accepts their studentship. If people don't accept, because they might have accepted somewhere else, because their personal circumstances might have changed, what we do is we go down that list further and further and further down until we basically depleted the funds that we hold. So this is the answer to the university kind of approach. Tom is asking whether there is a limit in working hours. So there is a limit in working hours. Usually this is about 6 to 7 hours per week. And in most cases, what we would try to do is we would try to work with you and the home institution to basically give you the opportunity to do additional teaching rather than, working at Weatherspoons or something like that. Reed, yes.
Hey, sorry, I just wanted to go over again, ask a question to do with the first section of the research proposal, the detailed description of the proposed research. I think I'm not fully understanding what's wanted there, because the next bits is obviously the background, literature review, methodology, timeline, and impact. I'm not really sure what you want in that initial first section.
So that initial first section is basically the section where you talk about the importance of the research proposal overall. What is it that you want to do and why is it important to us? It's what when you review a paper, the first thing that comes to mind is, so what? Why am I reading this one? Why someone would like to do that? So in that section, what you will do is you will tell us what your proposal is all about in a very succinct way. You will tell us how that relates to the theme you've selected and why, from your perspective, that's an important research question that we need to address. And then you basically tell us, how in detail you're going to go down and do the research questions, provide us with the literature, the background, and provide us with kind of the methodological approaches.
Thank you.
Right. I don't see any other questions. Oh, yes, I've got one more.
Good evening. Thank you very much for the presentation. I have a few questions. When you began to talk about the research proposal, you spoke about a lot of academic. You spoke about the why you're writing why do you want to do the research. You spoke about methodology. You spoke about time frame and impact, and then you began to speak about things that have to do with why are we good for the um are we good for the sponsorship or the scholarship. Is that supposed to be in the research proposal, or that's supposed to be in the personal statement?
So your ability to deliver the project is going to be evaluated on the basis of two pieces of information you provide. One is a section in your application which talks about your training, your existing training, and your existing skills, and then your personal statement, which is what are your motivations to do this particular project. So the panels, when they evaluate the applications, we provide them guidance where to look for in the different sections. So obviously you've got a personal statement which talks about you and your motivation, and then in the application there is a section which talks about your training, your skills, your abilities, and we take those two things together in order to utilize that criterion, your preparedness to deliver research.
All right, thank you very much.
Right. I think we're getting to the end of this webinar. I'd like to thank you all for your attendance here. As I said, if you've got any further questions, specifically to your project, to the process, I would be more than happy to kind of or arrange a one-to-one through my email. A lot of the information I've shared with you today is already on the website, so please visit that website. And if you've still got questions, please email us so we can arrange meetings and one-to-ones. Thank you very much for your time. Hope to read some of your proposals in the process. I tend to read quite a lot of those proposals myself as part of my role, and I hope to see some of you in person next October when we have our student induction for the October 2024 cohort. Good luck with your applications, and enjoy your break if you're going on holidays. Thank you very much.